Hey guys, welcome back to another Shadowlands Dungeon Trash Guide, where we take an in-depth look at all the trash, focusing on spells, abilities, buffs, and debuffs, and how to deal with them. Trash mobs make up the majority of your Mythic Plus run, and no one likes to randomly die to an ability that they were unprepared for while encountering these mobs. So let's get everyone in the know as we dive into this dungeon, and at the end, I'll recap some of the more impactful spells and abilities, so stay tuned for that. Before we start, I want to thank you all for the continued support on this channel. I want to continue to create content that helps and supports our community, and I cannot do that without you all. If you have not yet, make sure you click the subscribe button so you can be notified when the next video goes live. Alright, let's dive in. The first pack you encounter will consist of a Noble Skirmisher and 2 Famished Ticks. Noble Skirmishers will often cast Animate Weapon, which summons a weapon to fight along the Skirmisher. This can be interrupted by stuns, knockbacks, and disorients, and if left unchecked can cause you to be overwhelmed by multiple Animate Weapons. These weapons cast Anima Infused Strike, which causes their melee attacks to inflict shadow damage. If too many weapons get summoned, this can cause the tank to become overwhelmed, especially on a necrotic week. So make sure you lock the Skirmisher down as much as possible. The Famished Ticks will just cast Thrash on the highest threat target, dealing a small amount of physical damage. Not too much to worry about with these guys, just passively cleave them down with the rest of the pool. Next is the dreadful Huntmaster and the Regal Misdancer. Alone, their abilities aren't difficult, but both together make for an annoying combo. The Huntmaster will cast Dread Shot on a random player, inflicting a small amount of shadow damage, and will also cast Volatile Trap. This ability places a series of traps underneath random players that will deal a large amount of shadow damage to anyone within 3.5 yards of the trap when triggered. Do your best to bait these the best you can, and then move out before they go off. The Regal Misdancer will cast Echoing Thrust, roughly every 6 seconds. This inflicts a large amount of shadow damage to all players in a line in front of the cast. Each subsequent cast will create another copy, creating more and more to dodge. The best way to handle this is for the tank to aim the Misdancer away from the party, sidestep the ability when cast, and then return to the same spot to bait each thrust on top of the last. This, however, is made difficult when the Huntmaster throws out the traps, causing the tank or DPS to move. So do your best to stack these, and when you have to move, continue to aim the Misdancer away. The Insatiable Brute will cast Slam on the highest threat target, dealing a large amount of physical damage, and also cast Umbral Crash that targets a random player's location and leaps, leeching a small amount of health from all enemies within 6 yards of the impact, and also inflicting a small amount of shadow damage to all enemies beyond 6 yards. The Gluttonous Tick will cast Thrash, just like its weaker counterpart, the Famished Tick, and will also cast Engorge, which inflicts a small amount of shadow damage to a random enemy and gains an application of Engorge every 1 second for 5 seconds. Upon death or reaching 20 applications of Engorge, the Tick will explode, inflicting shadow damage to all nearby enemies. This damage is increased based on the number of applications of Engorge. If you interrupt Engorge often, this tick poses little threat. The last mob in this area is the Grubby Dirt Cruncher, which simply casts Bonk, which inflicts a moderate amount of physical damage to the highest threat target. After the first boss, you will find the Wicked Oppressor and the Dark Acolyte. The Wicked Oppressor will cast Rack Soul, which inflicts a moderate amount of shadow damage to a random player, and Curse of Suppression, which silences a target for 5 seconds. Both are interruptible, and if Curse of Suppression does go off, you can dispel the curse. Keep the damage low by interrupting, stunning, or otherwise stopping the cast, but save an interrupt for the Curse of Suppression, as it prioritizes casters, and if it targets your healer, it could cause issues. The Dark Acolyte is a simple caster mob that just spam casts Dark Bolt, which inflicts a moderate amount of shadow damage to a random target. Again, just lock down as many casts as you can to keep the incoming damage low. The Rockbound Sprite will cast Claw and Animate Pebble on the highest threat target, each ability dealing a small amount of physical damage. The Chamber Sentinel will cast Severing Slice, which inflicts a large amount of physical damage to all enemies in a cone in front of the caster, and causes them to bleed for a moderate amount of physical damage every 1 second for 10 seconds. This is aimed at the highest threat target, so tanks face this mob away from the group. Craggy Fracture causes the ground to erupt under each player's location. Anyone caught within takes a large amount of physical damage and is knocked into the air. Lastly, the Sentinel will cast Stone Skin, which reduces physical damage taken by 65% for 15 seconds, and this is interruptible. The Grand Overseer emanates overbearing presence until it dies. This aura will reduce all players' damage and healing done by 2% per stack, stacking every 5 seconds for 15 seconds. The Overseer will also cast Gloom Burst on a random target, inflicting a large amount of shadow damage, and this is interruptible. Dread Bindings is not interruptible and will inflict all players within 60 yards with a small amount of shadow damage and reduces their movement speed by 25% for 15 seconds. Moving away from the Grand Overseer will break the chains, so be ready to move or use abilities like Vengeful Retreat or Blessing of Freedom to break the chains, and Anti-Magic Shell will work if applied before the cast goes off. The Ravenous Dreadbat flies around the outskirts of some of the areas in the dungeon and will simply cast Sap Lifeblood. This 1.5 second interruptible cast will deal a moderate amount of shadow damage to a random player and heal the bat for twice the damage dealt. This is a fairly simple mob, just interrupt the cast and it will easily fall. Head Custodian Javelin is grouped with a few grubby Dirt Crunchers and will cast Motivational Clubbing on one of them, which deals physical damage to the Dirt Cruncher and increases its haste by 100% and health by 300%. This buff can be soothed, and with this buff the Dirt Cruncher can deal a fair amount of damage to the tank, so be aware. Javelin will also cast Sweeping Slash, which creates a tornado that will inflict a large amount of physical damage to all players hit and knocks them back. As you enter this circular room, you will encounter the Research Scribe and the Depths Warden. The Research Scribe will mostly alternate between Throw Research, which inflicts a moderate amount of physical damage to a random player, and Explosive Vellum, which inflicts a large amount of fire damage to all players within 6 yards of the marked location of the spell. The Depths Warden will cast Crushing Strike on the highest threat target, dealing a large amount of physical damage, and Barbed Shackles, which will root the target player and inflict a large amount of physical damage every 1 second for 10 seconds. The Barbed Shackle cast can be interrupted, and this is the only ability that can be interrupted, so make sure you stop this spell, as a player can be rooted and then caught in the Explosive Vellum cast, most likely killing them. Infused Quill Feather will simply cast Fiery Cantrip, which inflicts a moderate amount of fire damage to a random player. The Remnant of Fury will cast Explosive Anger, which targets a random player and inflicts a moderate amount of shadow damage every 1 second, but also increases the target's damage dealt by 25% for the duration. Upon expiration, the target explodes, dealing a large amount of shadow damage to the afflicted target and all nearby players. This is interruptible and can be dispelled with the Curse Dispel. And the Vestige of Doubt will cast Growing Mistrust, which cannot be interrupted, and summons an Expanding Pool that inflicts a moderate amount of shadow damage every 1 second to all players within it. This mob, however, can be stunned and disoriented. Last in this area is the Frenzied Ghoul. This small creature can deal a lot of damage to the tank. Shadow Claws inflicts a large amount of shadow damage to the highest threat target, and Frenzy increases its melee attack speed by 100%. If you encounter these mobs, be prepared with defensives and kite when those defenses are down. The last two mob types you will encounter are the Stonewall Gargons and the Sanguine Cadets. The Gargons only melee, and the Sanguine Cadets cast Pierce, which inflicts a moderate amount of physical damage to the highest threat target. Simple mobs that should only really cause issues on Necrotic Week and maybe Bolstering Weeks. So there were a fair amount of different mob types, but the most impactful abilities to watch out for in this dungeon would be the traps from the Huntmasters, coupled with the echoing thrust from the Misdancers. Thanks to your best to sidestep the ability and then go right back to where you were standing to stack the echoing thrust on top of the last, so it makes it easier for everyone else to dodge. Cursive Suppression can be deadly at the wrong time, so save interrupts for the silence. Face the Chamber Sentinel Gargoyle away from the party. Run out when Dread Bindings is cast to stop the damage and interrupt Barbed Shackles to avoid being comboed by the Explosive Vellum. Focus on these abilities to make this dungeon increasingly easier. I hope this trash guide helps you understand the dungeon and enables you to time more keys. Let me know if you have any other comments or questions below. And come stop by my Twitch channel and say hello. I stream every Tuesday and Thursday morning and Friday nights, so come hang out. But thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you all next time.